Submarine sunk here. Telephone inside." The message was written on a buoy floating in the Atlantic. Beneath it, a cable descended through 243 feet of cold water to a United States Navy submarine resting on the seafloor. Inside USS Squalus, 33 people were still alive. The buoy was their address. The telephone was their only voice. On May 23, 1939, the men below did not know whether anyone had seen it. They could not see the surface. They could not hear the ships beginning to search. They knew only that the submarine had flooded, the stern compartments were lost, and the pressure outside the hull was holding them where they were. Then the telephone rang. USS Squalus had found the buoy. For a few minutes, 2 submarines spoke across the boundary between the surface and the bottom. The message from Squalus was simple: 33 alive in the forward compartments. Then a wave lifted the small boat holding the telephone. The cable snapped. The voice from below disappeared. What followed was not a recovery of bodies. It became the first successful deep submarine rescue in United States Navy history. USS Squalus was one of the Navy's newest submarines. It had been commissioned less than 3 months earlier and was conducting test dives off Portsmouth, New Hampshire. On the morning of May 23rd, the submarine carried 59 people, Navy officers and sailors, along with civilian technicians. The dive began at 7:40. The plan was routine. Squalus would submerge, test its systems, return to the surface, and continue the trials required before entering full service. But as the submarine went down, seawater entered through the main engine air induction system. The after sections flooded rapidly. The crew tried to stop the descent. They blew ballast. They drove the bow upward. The stern continued falling. Squalus struck the seabed and came to rest upright. 26 people in the flooded after compartments were lost. 32 sailors and 1 civilian survived in the forward part of the boat. The watertight bulkheads between them and the flooded sections held. That barrier kept the sea out. It also separated the survivors from any escape route they could use alone. At 243 feet, the pressure outside made an uncontrolled ascent extremely dangerous. Escape equipment existed, but the conditions made its use uncertain. The men needed the surface to come down to them. Commander Oliver McCann ordered the release of the forward marker buoy. It carried the message identifying what lay beneath it and a telephone connected to the submarine. The crew also sent red smoke signals toward the surface. Each signal had the same purpose: make the invisible submarine visible. Squalus had been expected to report after the dive. When it failed to appear, the Portsmouth Navy Yard began responding. USS Squalus, a sister submarine operating nearby, was ordered to search. The 2 boats had nearly identical shapes and systems. That similarity would later help the rescuers understand the position of hatches and fittings they could not clearly see underwater. Squalus found a red smoke signal and then the telephone buoy. Its commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Warren Wilkin, established contact with McCann. For the first time, the surface knew that the submarine had not been lost with everyone aboard. There were 33 survivors. The information changed the operation immediately. Ships were no longer searching only for a missing vessel. They were racing toward living people. But the first connection did not last. A wave pulled the small boat handling the telephone away from the buoy. The cable parted. The survivors lost their voice. The surface also lost the buoy that marked the submarine's exact position. Squalus used sonar to search again. A tug dragged grappling equipment across the seabed until it caught the submarine. A new marker was placed above it. By evening, Navy and Coast Guard vessels were converging on the site. Divers, equipment, and submarine specialists were brought from shore. The rescue ship, USS Falcon, was still on its way. Time was passing inside Squalus. The surviving compartments were dark and cold. Electrical power was limited. The men had to conserve the air. They avoided unnecessary movement and conversation. They waited beneath a growing fleet they could not see. In an earlier submarine disaster, waiting had ended differently. In December 1927, USS 4 sank off Massachusetts after a collision. Divers reached the hull and discovered 6 men alive in one compartment. The trapped sailors tapped a question through the steel. Is there any hope? The answer was no. The Navy had no practical way to bring them out in time. The loss of S4 pushed officers and engineers to develop better escape and rescue systems. Among them were Charles Momsen and Alan McCann. Their work produced a rescue chamber designed to be lowered from a surface ship and sealed over a submarine hatch. The chamber had been tested. It had never been used to rescue people from an actual sunken submarine. Now, USS Squalus was on the bottom. The device built in response to one unanswered disaster was about to be tested against another. Falcon reached the area early on May 24th. The sea was difficult. The current complicated every descent. Divers had to locate the submarine, attach guide wires, and prepare the forward hatch. They worked in heavy equipment, connected to the surface by air hoses and communication lines. The rescue chamber resembled a compact diving bell. It could be lowered along a cable to the submarine. Once positioned over the escape hatch, water could be removed from the space between the chamber and the boat. The 2 hatches could then open. Survivors would enter the chamber. The hatch would close. The chamber would return to the surface. The idea was clear. Executing it at 243 feet was not. At 11:30 on May 24th, Falcon began lowering the chamber. The people inside Squalus could hear activity above them. Metal transmitted sound. Lines moved across the hull. Equipment contacted the deck. Then something settled over the forward hatch. For the men who had waited more than a day, the first opening of that hatch did not reveal the Atlantic. It revealed a small chamber connected to the surface. The first group entered. The chamber separated from the submarine and began rising. At the surface, ships and boats waited around Falcon. The chamber emerged from the water. The first survivors came out. The rescue had worked, but 24 people were still below. The chamber descended again. Each journey required the same sequence. Lower through dark water. Find the hatch, make the seal. Transfer the survivors. Close both vessels. Rise carefully. The second trip brought another group to the surface. The third followed. 25 people had been rescued. 7 survivors and Commander Naquin remained inside Squalus. The fourth descent became the most difficult. Cables tangled. The chamber was delayed underwater. For hours, the people on the surface could not simply pull it upward without risking the chamber and everyone inside. Divers worked to free the lines. Inside the chamber, the final group waited between the submarine and the surface. Shortly after midnight, the chamber began rising again. At 12:25 on May 25th, it reached the surface. The last 7 survivors were brought out. All 33 people who had remained alive inside Squalus had been rescued. The operation did not erase the 26 deaths. It did prove that a sunken submarine did not always have to become a sealed grave. The message buoy had allowed the survivors to announce themselves. The telephone contact had confirmed their number and location. Sonar, divers, surface ships, and the rescue chamber turned that information into action. The rescue also changed what navies believed was possible. Before Squalus, rescue from a disabled submarine at depth was often treated as a hope with little practical chance of success. After Squalus, rescue became an operational responsibility supported by specialized equipment, trained divers, and prepared ships. The chamber used in 1939 remained part of the history of submarine rescue. Its success became evidence that preparation made before a disaster could answer a message sent during one. Squalus itself did not remain on the bottom. The Navy began a difficult salvage operation. Months later, the submarine was raised, repaired, and recommissioned under a new name: USS Sailfish. It later served in the Pacific during the Second World War. The boat that had once rested beneath a rescue fleet returned to sea. The archive of the rescue is unusually complete. There are official reports, diving logs recording the descents, survivor testimony, photographs of the rescue chamber beside USS Falcon, images of the survivors returning to Portsmouth, and the written message associated with the buoy that made the first connection possible. Submarine sunk here. Telephone inside. For final message archive, this case ends differently. There is a sender, there is a receiver, there's a broken connection. But silence does not win. The telephone cable parted. The men below could no longer speak. The surface already knew they were alive. So it answered without words. A chamber descended through the Atlantic. The hatch opened, and this time, the final message brought people home.